The PlayStation has been in a very interesting place over the course of the last few years because the PS5 is simply exploding in popularity. Pretty much every single region of Europe and America and freaking places like Brazil, the Middle East, everybody is trying to buy a PlayStation, which is reflected in its record breaking sales. But what's peculiar is that PlayStation has really kind of lost a lot of its hype, its glamour, its profitability in Japan, the birthplace of the PlayStation. And now Jim Ryan, the CEO, the head of PlayStation itself, did an extended interview in the Japanese gaming magazine Famitsu. Now, Famitsu is a very, very big deal. This is one of the biggest gaming magazines on the planet, and he sat down to discuss the changes, the outlook, the points of view of PlayStation Japan, and sort of interesting tidbits like Spider-Man and PC ports. And I want to go over it, so let's take a look. What's up, gamers? DreamcastGuy here. Hi, hope you're having a great day. If you could like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll be honest, I was out till like 3 a.m. partying with my bros, watching my favorite band K-Flay, so if I sound a bit tired, it's because this delicious monster hasn't kicked in yet. But here we go. So even the beginning of this interview really starts off with a bit of a bombshell. The Japanese market has been and will continue to be the most important of markets. The reason, of course, is that Japan boasts the second largest market in the world, but more important than the simple statistics, Japan is the birthplace of PlayStation. Now, this statement is getting circled around a lot because, let's face it, it's a bit of an odd thing to say. If you're selling consoles, if you're already big and popular, you don't have to talk about how popular you are. This definitely sounds like a little bit of cope PR speak, because even in the replies, people point out he's been saying this, he keeps claiming that the PlayStation brand is strong in Japan, and yet the market share continues to drop. They did ask about those low software sales as well. It's an interesting interview. Now, I want to take a look at the entire interview here. I have a nice Google Translate of it. Now, part of the interestingness of this to me is that Jim Ryan has been incredibly silent over the course of the last year or so. And it seems like part of that comes down to the fact that he's just been so busy releasing all these big exclusive games, making sure stuff stays on schedule. And additionally, it does seem like Jim Ryan is downright terrified of the Activision Blizzard Microsoft agreement. I mean, he is clearly, people have been calling him crying Jim Ryan and lying Jim Ryan because he seems to be legit scared about the idea of PlayStation losing access to Call of Duty at some point, even in the far future. Now, I want to actually take a look at this interview in reverse order. I already read the whole thing, and down here at the bottom, he starts to talk about the questions I think people are the most curious about, like stuff like PC ports. Right now, obviously, Microsoft has really been pushing the idea of day and date. And Sony has been creeping up on that idea a bit. You know, they're now releasing a lot of their games from Horizon Zero Dawn, or even things obviously like God of War, Spider-Man. Now The Last of Us had its incredibly broken PC port, but everything that comes to PlayStation comes to PC eventually. And essentially he says two things here that are very, very delicious. He says they are being proactive about the release of PlayStation games on PC in the future. It sounds like now, instead of making a game entirely for the PS5 and then beginning development on PC, it sounds like they're being more forward focused, saying, okay, we're working on this, but we also want to already keep in mind that eventually this has to be a PC game. And he also says this here, which is interesting. He basically says, we realize the importance of PlayStation 5 titles. He says this in a little bit of weird Google Translate speak, but he's essentially saying we have a ton of PlayStation 5 exclusives coming up. We think they're going to be great. People are going to love them. But we're going to keep releasing games as much as possible on PC, but we think it's good to have a 2 to 3 year gap. Now, This is definitely smart. If you actually look at the raw sales numbers that have even been publicly released for their exclusives thus far, I think Jim Ryan realizes that, okay, it's good to release a game on the PS5, let it get hyped, let it get awards, let it get the conversation cycle like freaking God of War Ragnarok. Everybody's celebrating it for months and months and months. And then 2 years later, you drop it on PC, you get the PC gamers to buy it again for, let's face it, a full $70. They start modding it, it builds up social media again, and you have a second wave of profitability of a game you've already fully finished. That's kind of interesting that it seems like they're never going to go day and date, or maybe they will with something like their games as a service projects that they're kicking around, but interesting to hear it a lot. Now, here's one of the other things people are talking about, which is that even the biggest, most popular games, like Ghost of Tsushima, is a mega juggernaut in the rest of the world. I mean, people were literally blown away. I still think that Ghost of Tsushima is one of my favorite games on the PlayStation. I platinumed it on PS4 and PS5. Ghost of Tsushima deserves the hype. I listen to the soundtrack constantly. But he says here, how do you think the Japanese market is changing? I think the Japanese fans have changed a lot compared to the past. In the past, titles from Japanese manufacturers were popular, but recently they're enjoying titles from overseas with an open mind. For example, Ghost of Tsushima has sold over 1 million copies in Japan. I think that proves just how popular the titles of foreign manufacturers are. So way in the past, in Japan specifically, people were really, really dead set on their own patriotism. You know, like, hey, we want Final Fantasy, we want Monster Hunter, we want games like Dragon Quest. We want our games on our consoles. Rah, rah, Japan. But what's interesting is that it is cool that as Western RPGs and Western development sort of takes over the industry, they're being open-minded to it. But still, Jim Ryan is phrasing this as a positive, but 1 million copies sold still seems incredibly low to me. But going back to it here, he says this, the game has a lot of fans in Japan, so I think there are many users who will be happy with it. I just answered about the importance of the Japanese market, and based on these examples, I think the Japanese market is important. So obviously this is Google Translate. It's a little bit funky, but it says it's an interesting and attractive market. I think one of the characteristics of Japan is the history of game culture and the assets that have been passed down from the past. It is precisely because of this that we're able to create a more wonderful batch of titles. Okay, so PR speak again of him basically saying, like, let's face it, what he's trying to imply is that they will never abandon Japan. People aren't really buying PlayStation 5s in that region. From what I've heard and from what I've looked at, for some reason, Japan loves the idea of gaming on the go. They spend a lot of time on trains and stuff. They're, very focused on the salaryman life. So the Nintendo Switch has completely taken over Japan, which I find fascinating. If you actually look at things like Splatoon 3 sales numbers, or obviously the Zelda sales numbers in Japan, they are absolutely surreal. But it's interesting to hear him specifically, basically promising that they're not going to abandon a market. It seems like things that should go unsaid, but he decided to verbalize it. Now, he's really doubling down on the fact that they are still focusing on specific titles that they want to sell worldwide, but they hope will find an audience specifically in Japan, like Rise of the Ronin. It's that big new open world samurai game by Koei Tecmo. He says here, we think it'll be extremely strong and we'll give it marketing power and distribution network to publish it. This combination technique is the secret to making the game a hit. Now, I'll be honest, of this entire interview, this to me is actually the most fascinating tidbit, and nobody is really discussing it. He is essentially acknowledging something that I have guessed in previous videos, which is that I think that Sony is doing a deal where they're approaching people and saying, okay, if you make a game exclusively on PlayStation and it looks good, obviously it's a high budget AAA game, we will market it. We will do everything. We will put it in PlayStation showcases. We'll put it on all the billboards. We'll put it in every commercial. That's what this sounds like. It sounds like Koei Tecmo, who has worked with PlayStation in the past, obviously, and even companies like Square Enix to make PlayStation exclusives. It sounds like they're saying, we're using our extremely strong marketing power and distribution to make it a hit. I have thought that they're doing this already. I think that PlayStation has this interesting methodology where they are way in first when it comes to consoles, and I think they realize, okay, if we say here's the next big game and it's actually a good one, obviously, they can make it sell. They can make you those billions of dollars of profit, which again is going to sell more consoles, so it's win, win, win. Man, across the board, though, I am just interested in stuff like this right here. PlayStation Game Studios sales numbers in Japan are not interesting if a game is a hit in So this is a funny one. Although PlayStation Studios AAA titles have sold 10 to 20 million units worldwide, sales in Japan often remain relatively small. Please tell us your frank thoughts about software sales in Japan. And he basically says, please don't ask me this. He literally says this. Every market, not just Japan, has its own characteristics. That's why there's a difference between the market when the same title can sell. That doesn't matter. It wouldn't be interesting if the same title was a hit in every region. All right, look at this. This is some major cope. Because honestly, if you're selling a game, you want it to be popular in every country. Like, I'm a YouTuber. I want to get views from every country, but I think it'd be cool if I was big in Japan and Germany and America and Australia and stuff like that. So him trying to act like, oh, I'm not worried about that. As long as the game sells, I'm happy. The business is never boring and exciting because each region where games sell has its own characteristics. All right, come on, buddy. Come on. That you wish you had higher sales in Japan, but you'll take what you can get. Okay, so a lot of this early stuff here is very much PR speak, so I'm going to skip that and look at one final thing. But he essentially tries to again talk about how Japan is making a lot of the highest selling games on PlayStation. He mentioned specifically Final Fantasy, Monster Hunter, Tekken, just to name a few. These are countless masterpieces developed by Japanese developers and released by publishers. It is interesting to think about how Japan is this pocket of incredibly high quality talent and dedication and franchise creation, and it just keeps going and going and going. So I think it's cool that, Jim Ryan still recognizes, respects, and is just letting that industry sort of flare up because they're making that money big time for PlayStation. But here, this is the final thing. It's a little short tidbit, but he actually just hints a bit about the quality of Spider-Man 2. PlayStation Studios plans to release Spider-Man 2 in 2023. Please tell us your thoughts on this work. I'm sure that Spider-Man 2 will be a very exciting launch because Marvel's Spider-Man released on PlayStation 4 and it's a touchstone. The title was a huge success on the PlayStation 4 and was enjoyed by millions of users. I think still, technically, Spider-Man on PlayStation 4, I think it sold like 30 million copies. I think it's technically one of the most successful PlayStation games ever by a huge metric. But it says this: the sequel to Spider-Man 2 is being developed exclusively for the PlayStation 5, so the developers will have to make no compromises. Okay, so I think that pretty much confirms we're going to get 4K modes and 60 FPS. We asked them to focus on maximizing the functions of the PlayStation 5, creating the best works. As a result, we've received feedback from game fans that it looks like it'll be enjoyable with really beautiful visuals and a wonderful experience. So he's trying to be vague, but I do wonder, the thing I have talked the most about that I am the most curious about is there have been rumors that there's going to be some sort of multiplayer in Spider-Man 2. This kind of seems to allude to that of like, oh yeah, we're working on a big, fun, interactive experience that maximizes the power of the PlayStation. Does that mean multiplayer? Because I would lose my freaking mind if I could play a little bit of Spider-Man with other webheads. Overall, I think this interview is very insightful. Lots of PR speak, of course, but I do think it's actually a pretty good little interview. Okay, my DMs are blowing up on Twitter, so something must be happening. But I love you guys very much. Please, if you could, give this video a big thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already, and please keep dreaming. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.